A bottle of water costs $50. Not literally, but when your currency collapses and imports get repriced fast, that's what the shock feels like. And right now, in Tokyo, Japan, that nightmare is playing out in real time. The Japanese yen went from around 110 to the dollar to over 160 at the lows, a drop of more than 30% in just a couple of years. Wages haven't changed, prices have, and the Bank of Japan held the line for years because they had no other choice. Even when they finally started loosening their grip in 2024, the constraint didn't disappear. Welcome to the debt trap, and America is walking straight into it. Today, we're dissecting three things. First, the policy decision that broke the yen. Second, the math that made it inevitable. And third, why the United States is on the same path, just a few years behind. By the end of this, you'll understand something that most economists won't tell you directly. The financial security you think you have is built on foundations that are actively crumbling. Let's start with the trigger. In September 2016, the Bank of Japan did something that most central banks would never admit to doing. They stopped pretending they weren't manipulating the bond market, and they made it official. They called it yield curve control, or YCC, and the idea was deceptively simple. The BOJ would target a specific interest rate on 10-year government bonds, around 0%, and they would buy as many bonds as necessary to keep it there. If the market pushed rates up, the central bank would push them back down. Unlimited buying power, unlimited intervention. The market wanted higher rates? Too bad. The Bank of Japan would simply print more yen and buy more bonds until the market surrendered. At the time, it seemed clever. Japan had been fighting deflation for decades. Interest rates were already near zero. Traditional monetary policy wasn't working. The economy was stuck in a rut where people and businesses refused to borrow and spend because they expected prices to keep falling. Why buy something today if it'll be cheaper tomorrow? So the BOJ decided to take direct control of the entire yield curve, from overnight rates all the way out to 10 years. The goal was to keep borrowing costs low enough to stimulate the economy while avoiding the weird side effects that come from negative interest rates crushing bank profits. For a while, it worked, or at least it didn't blow up immediately. Interest rates stayed low, the government could keep borrowing cheaply, Japanese banks could still function. Economists wrote papers about how Japan had discovered a new monetary policy tool. Some even suggested that other central banks should copy the approach. The problem was what happened next. Fast forward to 2022. The world changed. Inflation exploded across the globe, supply chains broke, energy prices spiked. The Federal Reserve started hiking interest rates aggressively, from near zero to over 5% in just 18 months. European central banks followed. Suddenly, you could earn real returns on dollars and euros, while yen-denominated assets were still paying basically nothing. Now, imagine you're a currency trader, a pension fund manager, or just someone with savings looking for the best return. Would you rather hold yen earning zero or dollars earning 5%? The answer is obvious. Money flooded out of Japan. Investors sold yen to buy dollars, and when money leaves a country, the currency weakens. The yen started falling and falling and falling. Here's where the trap snaps shut. The Bank of Japan faced a choice. They could abandon yield curve control, let interest rates rise and defend the yen, or they could keep rates pinned at zero and watch their currency collapse. Most central banks would choose to raise rates. Japan couldn't, not without blowing up their own budget. By March 2024, the BOJ finally ended negative interest rates and officially retired the YCC framework. But that didn't solve the underlying problem. They raised rates only marginally because they had to. The debt is still there. The constraint is still there. The yen remains weak. Why? Because the Japanese government owes too much money. Japan's gross government debt sits at roughly 250% of GDP. That means for every dollar of economic output, the government owes $2.50. This is by a wide margin the highest debt ratio of any major developed economy. Not Greece, not Italy, not the United States, Japan. For comparison, the United States is currently around 100%, still too high, but nothing like Japan. When you owe that much money, interest rates become existential. Even a small increase in borrowing costs can create a fiscal crisis. Imagine you owe 100 trillion yen and interest rates rise by just 1%. That's an extra trillion yen in annual interest payments. The Japanese government is already running deficits every year. They can't afford higher rates, so they have to keep rates low, which means the yen stays weak, which means inflation stays elevated, which means living standards fall. This is the debt spiral. You borrow too much, so you have to keep rates artificially low, so your currency crashes, so imported goods become more expensive, so inflation rises, so living standards fall. But you can't raise rates to fix it, because that would bankrupt the government. So you do almost nothing. You sit there and watch your people get poorer while pretending everything is under control. And here's the cruel twist that makes Japan's situation especially painful. Japan imports almost all of its oil, most of it from the Middle East, natural gas from Australia and Southeast Asia, coal from everywhere, all priced in dollars or other foreign currencies, all getting more expensive as the yen weakens. Think about what this means in practical terms. The bread on your table? Imported wheat. The tofu in your miso soup? Imported soybeans. The beef in your gyudon bowl? Probably imported. When your currency loses a third of its value, all of these things get a third more expensive. And unlike a one-time price shock, this doesn't go away. The yen stays weak and the prices stay high. That sushi restaurant that seems so cheap to tourists? For a Japanese worker earning yen, the prices are climbing every month. The irony is painful. Japan, famous worldwide for its food culture, can't feed itself. So when we talk about a $50 water bottle, we're being somewhat dramatic, but the underlying reality isn't far off. A tourist visiting Japan today finds everything shockingly cheap, the best travel deal on earth. That's because their dollars buy more yen than ever before. But for an ordinary Japanese worker earning their salary in yen and paying their bills in yen, the math runs backwards. Their paycheck buys fewer calories, fewer kilowatt hours, fewer liters of gasoline. Their purchasing power is evaporating. Before we go further, let me ask you something. If you're watching this and thinking about your own savings, your own retirement, your own purchasing power, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. We put out content like this regularly, and the algorithm only shows it to people who engage. The more you interact, the more people see this, and the more pressure we put on politicians to actually deal with these problems before it's too late. All right, back to it. Let's talk about the United States.
America likes to think it's different. We have the world's reserve currency. We have the largest economy. We have military bases in 40 countries. We have aircraft carriers patrolling every ocean. Surely the dollar is immune to what's happening to the yen, right? Not exactly. The United States currently runs a debt-to-GDP ratio around 100%. That's lower than Japan's 250, but the trajectory matters more than the snapshot. In 2008, U.S. debt was about 60% of GDP. In 2019, before the pandemic, it was around 80%. Today, it's 100, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, it's projected to keep climbing. The CBO's baseline projections show federal debt held by the public reaching 116% of GDP by 2034, and that assumes no new spending, no new tax cuts, no recessions, no wars, no pandemics. Best case scenario, we're still heading toward levels that most economists consider dangerous. If anything goes wrong, if there's another financial crisis, another pandemic, another war requiring major spending, the numbers get much worse, much faster. Now, America has advantages that Japan doesn't. The dollar is the global reserve currency. When there's a crisis anywhere in the world, people buy dollars. When oil is traded, it's priced in dollars. When emerging market countries need to hold foreign exchange reserves, they hold dollars. That creates structural demand for our currency and our debt that Japan can never match. American energy production has also surged in recent years, thanks to the shale revolution. We're not as vulnerable to currency swings as Japan is. But those advantages can erode. The dollar's reserve status isn't guaranteed forever. China is actively promoting the yuan for international trade. Saudi Arabia is flirting with accepting yuan for oil. The BRICS nations are talking about alternative payment systems. Countries that don't like American foreign policy, and there are more of them every year, are looking for alternatives to the dollar-based financial system. None of these alternatives are ready to replace the dollar today, but 10 years from now? 20? The structural demand for dollars that has allowed America to borrow cheaply might not be there forever. And if America's fiscal trajectory continues, at some point, investors will start demanding higher interest rates to hold our debt, not because they think we'll default, but because they'll need compensation for the inflation that will inevitably eat their returns. When you can see a train wreck coming from a mile away, you either get off the tracks or you demand hazard pay. When that happens, the Federal Reserve will face the same ugly choice that the Bank of Japan faced: raise rates and crash the economy under the weight of interest payments, or keep rates low and let the dollar slide. Japan chose the bonds. The Fed will face the same choice. Picture this scenario. It's 2035. The U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio has hit 130%. Interest payments on the debt now consume more than defense spending, more than Medicare, second only to Social Security. The Federal Reserve wants to fight inflation, but every rate hike adds hundreds of billions of dollars to the federal deficit. Political pressure builds to keep rates low. Wall Street screams about recession. Homeowners panic about mortgage rates, and so the Fed blinks. The dollar starts to weaken. Import prices rise. Inflation proves sticky. Sound familiar? Some people will tell you this can never happen here. They'll say that because America controls the printing press for the world's reserve currency, we can always create more dollars to pay our debts. Technically true.
But creating more dollars to pay debts is just inflation by another name. The government doesn't default in the traditional sense. Your savings lose value all the same. A dollar that buys half as much is the same as getting 50 cents on the dollar. There's a name for this kind of default. Economists call it financial repression. You keep interest rates below the rate of inflation, which means savers slowly lose purchasing power, while borrowers, including the government, get to repay their debts with cheaper money. It's a transfer of wealth from people who saved to people who borrowed. And when the biggest borrower in the world is the federal government, that means a transfer from ordinary citizens to the political class that created the problem. Japan has been running this playbook for years. Real interest rates, meaning the interest rate minus inflation, have been negative for the most of the past decade. Japanese savers get practically nothing on their deposits, while prices creep higher. It's a slow-motion wealth tax that never shows up on any ballot, that no politician ever has to defend, that most people don't even know is happening. And now, America seems to be heading down the same road. In 2022 and 2023, U.S. inflation ran between 4 and 8%, while savings accounts paid maybe 1 or 2%. Even with the Fed's rate hikes, real interest rates barely turned positive. If inflation proves sticky and the Fed blinks, we could see years of negative real returns, your money in the bank slowly evaporating while the government pretends everything is fine. So what's the end game? For Japan, there are 3 possible paths forward. The first is that they somehow grow their way out. Economic growth raises tax revenues, shrinks the debt ratio, and makes everything easier. The problem is that Japan's population is shrinking and aging. Hard to grow when you have fewer workers every year, and the workers you have are getting older. Japan has tried everything to boost growth, and nothing has worked. The second path is austerity. Cut spending, raise taxes, run surpluses, and gradually pay down the debt. This is what economists always recommend, and politicians never do. Politically impossible. Japan's government has been promising fiscal discipline for decades and delivering deficits every year. The third path is inflation. Let prices rise, which effectively shrinks the real value of the debt. This is what they're doing now, whether they admit it or not. The yen's weakness is a de facto devaluation that makes the debt easier to service at the cost of ordinary people's living standards. The government doesn't have to cut a single program. They just let inflation do the cutting for them. America has more options because we are earlier in the debt cycle. We could still reform entitlement spending before the demographics make it impossible. We could still grow faster through better trade policy, immigration policy, and regulatory reform. We could still avoid the trap that Japan fell into. The window is closing, though. Every year that passes, the debt gets bigger, the interest payments get larger, and the political will to fix the problem gets weaker. The longer you wait to diet, the more weight you have to lose. The longer you wait to fix a debt problem, the more painful the fix becomes. But we probably won't fix it, because politicians hate making hard choices, and voters hate hearing hard truths. So we'll keep running deficits, keep piling on debt, and keep pretending the day of reckoning will never come. Until it does. The yen's collapse isn't some exotic foreign problem that Americans can safely ignore. It's a preview of what happens when governments make promises they can't keep and debts they can't repay. Japan is 15 years ahead of us on this path. They're showing us exactly where it leads. The question is whether we're paying attention. I know this was heavy. I know it's easier to ignore, to change the channel, to assume that smart people in Washington will figure it out. But pretending the problem doesn't exist won't make it go away. What will make a difference is ordinary people understanding what's happening and demanding that their representatives do something about it. Share this video, talk to your friends, make noise. The political class responds to pressure. Give them some. I'll see you then.